Hi, everyone. Hi, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's celebration of the 2024 female-led BAFTA nominated films. My name is Melanie. I'm director of Reclaim the Frame. And just to self-describe, I'm a white woman, long blonde hair, in a suit and red lipstick for the occasion.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Rōgan. I'm the program producer at Reclaim the Frame. I'm a biracial Black woman with long brown curly hair and gold hoops that you might not be able to see. To tell you a little bit about Reclaim the Frame is a charity which champions marginalised gender-led perspectives in cinema and connects with audiences through community building and conversation across the UK and online, so from wherever.
This is a really special event for us. It's a chance to congratulate, to celebrate, and to bring together the women filmmaker nominees, each up for awards across various BAFTA categories, in what has been a mixed picture this year for marginalised gender filmmakers.
So without further ado, we are delighted to be talking to Madeleine Gavin, director of BEYOND UTOPIA, which has been nominated for the Documentary Award. Rebecca Lloyd-Evans and Lisa Selby, co-directors of Blue Bag Life, which has been nominated for the Outstanding Debut by Writer, Director or Producer Award. Savanah Leaf, director and writer of Earth Mama, which has been nominated for the Outstanding Debut by Writer, Director or Producer Award. Brenda Hsueh, writer of Elemental, which has been nominated for the Animated Film Award. Molly Manning Walker, director and writer of How to Have Sex, which has been nominated for the Outstanding British Film and Outstanding Debut by Writer, Director or Producer and Casting Award. Ella Glendinning, director of Is There Anybody Out There, which has been nominated for the Outstanding Debut Writer, Director or Producer Award. Ella also has a co-star this evening, her son River, who's a little bit sick. So if you hear any coughs or if Ella disappears for a little while, that will be why, but we're very glad to have River with us. So we'll start with you, Savanah, if that's okay. Your film follows a pregnant mother trying to cope with her addiction and get two of her children back from social services. A few years ago, you made a documentary, The Heart Still Hums, about women-led organisations who help mothers like Gia, Tia No More's character. When exploring this topic in a longer form, why did you choose fiction over documentary?
I initially wrote like a first draft of the script, which was kind of thinking about my relationship to my own sister. It was thinking about my own mother, being a single mom raising me. It was thinking about what it's like to be a child and not knowing a parent, and trying to understand why that parent isn't parenting you. And it was kind of like an accumulation of all of these things, all of the mothers that have kind of like also helped in parenting me. And then I made that documentary short, and that documentary short was kind of like emotional research, but it did pose the question, like, should I make a feature-length documentary or should I maintain on that more fictionalized version of the script? And I decided to ultimately go back to that script because in part, I felt like maybe doing the documentary could potentially intrude or interfere with someone's case on whether or not they're going to get their kids back. And I felt that was kind of like a bit of an ethical question for myself. And also there's so much fear as well in revealing your story. And I felt like in a way kind of me just becoming friends with people and hearing their stories and learning and including that as more of kind of like this emotional research for the script in a way could be more truthful. And so I kind of came back to the fictionalized script and just kind of made it feel like this collective voice between not just myself and my own story, but also all these different people that have kind of come in and out of my life at various moments and wanted to share a piece of themselves, and also the cast that ended up sharing a piece of themselves into the film as well.
And Madeleine, if we could come to you next, talk about Beyond Utopia. I feel like we have so rarely seen the impact of the North Korean dictatorship dictatorship on individuals and families so close up. It feels like in Beyond Utopia, you're following the defectors fleeing almost in real time. And I wonder if you can tell us a bit about how you approached your contributors, about that relationship, and mostly about the kind of security, you know, what protections you were able to offer them. It's such a brave film.
Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, the fact that we haven't seen the impact of the Kim regime on North Koreans in our media is precisely why I wanted to make this film. I mean, when I began doing research, that was the void that I found. You know, I found this hidden camera footage from inside North Korea that was being shot by North Koreans who were risking their lives to get the story of real people inside North Korea out. And then there was an absence of those real people in our media. So that is precisely why I wanted to make this. And, you know, in that, because there was such an absence of North Koreans in our media, I also wanted to try to do something as sort of experiential and as up close and personal, as you say, that really does attempt to put audiences in the shoes of these people who we have essentially not even acknowledged for now 75 years, right? And, you know, in the process of this, I sought out a man named Pastor Kim, who is a South Korean pastor who has a huge network in the Underground Railroad that goes through China, Southeast Asia. And it was through him that we were able to document these escapes, as you say, in real time. It was through him and his vast network. And in terms of risks, you know, our subjects, Pastor Kim, there are, for people who don't know, there are 3 subjects in our film: Pastor Kim, a mother named Savanah Leaf, and a defector named Hyunsia Lee, all of whom have been known by the Kim regime for more than, you know, well, Pastor Kim and Hyunsia for more than 20 years, and Soyeon a little bit less, but they have already been known by the regime. They have at times been targeted by the regime in South Korea. So that was one thing. In terms of the escapes, and particularly this family of 5 who we follow literally from the border of North Korea and China, what you're saying was absolutely key. I mean, these are people who had fled across the river from North Korea into China, knowing that China was the way out, but really not knowing anything about the geography or where you go from there, because they'd lived in North Korea, and North Korea tries to put a blackout on any information from the outside, right? And so our mandate from the beginning, you know, these people were lucky enough to run into someone literally in the mountains of China who was semi-sympathetic to their cause and knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew Pastor Kim. And this is how Pastor Kim became involved. But the mandate from the beginning was, we have to do this in a way that doesn't put additional risk into an escape that was already obviously extremely risky, because when they crossed into China, the Rō family were at extreme risk. And that was what dictated everything that we did going forward. You know, every decision about who could be where, what cameras could be used where, was dictated from that place. And for instance, none of us obviously went into China. Pastor Kim himself does not go into China. He hasn't gone in since 2009 because he was warned that he could possibly be kidnapped into North Korea if he ever went into China. So everything shot in China was shot by a family member of the Rō family who had already defected, and the Underground Railroad. And then from there, we were able to be in Southeast Asia, et cetera. A really interesting thing that your question brings up, which I've never experienced before in all the films I've worked on, is the issue of consent, right? You know, again, we have a family who's escaped over the river into China. They couldn't possibly even conceive of what a documentary film is, right? Let alone whether they would want to be a part of it, have any perspective on the issues involved, et cetera. And so one thing that we realized early on in this process was that the only possible way to even try to make a film like this was for us as filmmakers to go in being okay with the idea and the very strong possibility that we may never be able to use a single frame of what we were shooting. And that was crazy on the one hand, and on the other hand, there was no other way to do it. And so that was what we did. And, you know, Pastor Kim and the Rowe family and Soyeon, our subjects, have been traveling with us a lot. And I'll finish this up. I know I can talk forever on this. But, and one thing Pastor Kim always says is how this film is this testament in a way to courage and trust. And what ultimately happened, you know, was this incredible trust between all of us. But it was quite a process. And everything you're pointing out was absolutely key to this particular film and the challenges that we faced.
Yeah, thank you. That's incredible trust. I guess I was thinking about the trust of that the contributors were showing towards you, but I guess for you to trust that at the end of this you would have a film that you were able to show is also.
Yeah, or even if we didn't, it was like at a certain point, you know, this is what we're trying to do, and there is no other way. So either we do it or we don't. And yeah, it was the most extraordinary experience of my life. Now I'm going to get emotional, but making this film was just so incredibly meaningful to everyone.
Thank you. It's such an incredibly valuable work. My mind was blown watching it. And to talk about trust and that kind of collaboration, that in really like a trustful, the really intense bond, I think, that you need between like subject and filmmaker. It sort of brings me to Blue Bag Life and Rebecca and Lisa. Your documentary's been lodged in my brain, and there are people I want to show it to, but I need to be delicate with how I show it. But I was curious to know, Lisa, you're in almost like every frame of the film, and it's part found footage, and then you kind of see the process of you deciding to actually do something with it. How did Rebecca come on board? How did you build that collaboration and work together to tell your story, Lisa?
Well, it was never actually meant to be a film, so this is quite baffling that we've got to this stage. I was just recording things so I could remember what was going on in all of this chaos, and I'd met, actually Bex always talks about this part, so it's like I'm not really used to speaking about it. Can you join in with this bit?
Yeah, of course. I met Lisa because I interviewed her for a podcast series that I was making about prison, connected to prison. And at the time, Lisa was super outspoken about prison reform and abolition on her Instagram account. And anyone that followed Lisa's Blue Bag Instagram account can see that although she wasn't a filmmaker, she is a filmmaker, and just the images and the little bits of footage that she was putting up, I had quite a strong sense that there was a film there. But it took quite a long time before I plucked up the courage to ask Lisa whether she'd ever consider using her work to become a film. You know, friendship was key. First of all, we needed that friendship. And I always thought we'd have to film lots of other things around her material. But what became clear was that Lisa had documented this kind of had this unquantifiable amount of material of her life, and in the end, the film, that Blue Bag Life, everything is from Lisa's own personal archive. So, like, if you think about trust, I think a huge part of our trust was that it's a collaboration at its core. You know, this isn't me making a film about Lisa, although I came from a documentary background. This was Lisa as the filmmaker as well, and the two of us, well, it's more than the two of us, there were 5 of us, but the collective of us coming together and doing it together. And I think that really that's where the trust formed. What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, there was a moment where I was passing over all of my passwords, let alone SD cards, hard drives, laptops, everything. And I'm not one to censor stuff, and I haven't really got time for that. So it was just like, God, like, what are they going to be watching today? And there were some interesting moments where they're just like sifting through it all. And I couldn't be there because I was working. I teach, I lecture in fine arts. I'm an artist at the core, but being involved in this way kind of meant that I had some kind of ownership over the material, and through discussions, and also therapy was was part of the budget. What's it called? The budget line. Yeah, and so had loads of therapy, so I wasn't on their case all of the time about, you know, and then it started to get shot in real time as well, with lots of things going on like IVF. And I mean,
and it was interesting that moment that it transitioned, because so quite a lot of the film came from what had already happened in Lisa's life and the archive that she had documented, and then at some point we were editing and Lisa's life was continuing to unfold. I would think, as the director here, am I being really lazy because I should be going and shooting what's going on? Am I just being super lazy? But we just stuck to this idea that it was Lisa documenting her own life, and like that like continued to be the language of the film. I suppose that sounds a bit pretentious, but you know, and I think that she did an amazing job. Like, Lisa's an instinctive filmmaker. I always think of looking at her material, and there's a moment where she's lying on the bed and like just talking and filming a fan on her ceiling, and I felt like I was immediately with her. And like, I never would have had that idea of having that shot of a little bit of a ceiling fan like in the edge of a frame, but you know, that was how Lisa was, just like without even, I think it was the artist in you that just sort of had your own vision, I suppose.
You don't always just follow someone when they're talking or walking out of the room, do you? You're just like looking at the light or the curtains or whatever else. So it's a way of keeping people with me. And also I think it's really important that the team were encouraging me as a filmmaker. So you can see I'm going like, oh, that's a lens, seduced by a lens flare, or I don't know what this button is, or my heavy breathing into the camera, and not being ashamed to show any of that stuff, or that excitement about seeing what certain, well, I wouldn't say cameras, because I was using like a Canon 70D and an iPhone. But I got a new iPhone, which was great on the equipment budget. But yeah, they continue to encourage me as a filmmaker, and they're, you know, most of the team are experts, and it's just an amazing process.
It feels like a bit of a miracle how it all came together, that you just had all of this, and that you and Rebecca just crossed paths. Yeah, it's amazing to learn about how it all came together, and thank you for it. It's wonderful.
Brilliant that it's being recognised with a nomination as well, and I'm so glad to hear that there was a wellbeing line in the budget as well. I'm loving hearing about this being factored in as kind of standard more and more. Molly, if we could come to you next, and congratulations on, I think it's 3 nominations.
Thank you.
You've got for How to Have Sex. It's such a incredible and interesting like exploration of teenage sex, of the kind of the virginity myth of consent. And I'd love to hear about some of the responses to the film, but more the conversations that it's generated about boundaries, about consent, also about pleasure.
One of the most beautiful moments of the process for me has been, we've started taking it into schools to teach consent. So recently I was at the back of with a charity called Schools Consent Project, and recently I was at the back of a class in quite a rough school where they just watched the film, and I had like my hood up and I was like hiding, and it was to check whether I were kind of aggrieved with the way they were teaching using the film. And these kids were like climbing on the tables and like throwing stuff at the screen, and like it was quite rowdy. And then they started to discuss their concept of consent. And these 2 kids, a girl and a boy, they didn't recognize a rape in the film. You know, they really thought that everything was kosher, like was fine in it. And these 2 like boys at the back who you might preconceive as quite rough boys stood up and were like, listen, man, you have to check in with someone. You have to understand what someone's face is doing. You can't just take yes for yes. And they started teaching the other kids about consent within the class. And for me, if we can give the language to kids to talk about it without us being involved, and without them having to use themselves, they can talk about the characters and what the characters are going through, then that feels quite radical to me. And that was quite an emotional moment for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think the language is the thing, because in the film, the teenagers don't really have the language for it to call a rape. Like, they know, your lead like knows that what's happened to her is not okay, but she isn't quite able to kind of articulate that, which is why these conversations around the film and putting that language in the room is like so important.
Yeah, for sure. And the pleasure thing as well. I mean, the fact that we don't know enough about female bodies and female pleasure is so huge, and I end up talking about that every day. But people keep asking me to make an actual tutorial on how to have sex, so maybe we'll do that next.
Thank you.
Brenda, I want to come to you next. You are one of the co-writers on Elemental, which is a gorgeous Disney film, but the kind of themes that you've wrestled into it or stuck into it. I was reading that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was cited as one of the inspirations behind the film. Could you talk a little bit about the process of discovering kind of how to tell those stories through what is often considered just a kid's medium?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about Pixar is that it is this kind of like commercial, broadly appealing 4-quadrant kind of movie. But really, I think the beauty about Pixar movies, I think they are trying to say something deeper and more meaningful, but in this entertaining, accessible way. It's like sort of like you feel like you're eating candy, but you're actually eating some vegetables. And so I think this movie is so meaningful to me because the director is Korean American. We're both first-generation immigrants. And there's obviously a lot of those themes in this movie, and it's basically an interracial romance between like a POC fire person and the water white guy, and just how challenging that is, but also how gratifying that can be, and also just on a level like the metaphor of these elements and different elements mixing together and how that's dangerous but also beautiful is also like about diversity and like how that's challenging but great. So it's like I love that it's saying something, but it's also just like beautiful and fun, and there's so many fun gags if you're like a water person and you're a fire person, and like how dangerous that can be but also fun and like all that stuff. So it was just such a perfect world to say something meaningful, but also be super entertaining and visual. So yeah, the director had this idea, and mainly a lot of the thing he wanted to do is sort of like kind of thank our immigrant parents and the sacrifice they've made to come to this country and all the hardship they've had to endure, and like speak to that and that experience and how you feel indebted as a child, but also you have to find your own way and make your own decisions. And so that all those themes were like to me meaningful to him. And so when we started working together, we were like, how do we tell this story? How do we tell this? And also I was really psyched to do a romance, frankly. Like Pixar has never done a romance in all their years. They're all like sexless buddy comedies. And so just kind of seeing, and I was excited to do that and show how this interracial romance can be challenging but also really beautiful, and yeah, and so we'll see how it does. I think I answered your question. Did I answer your question?
You did, thank you.
Ella, congratulations. And is there anybody out there? There's a moment in the film that really stands out to me. I've watched it a few times actually, and it stands out to me every time. I guess from an industry point of view, I guess, that, there's a moment where you reveal, and I think it's quite brave, that you had feedback on maybe it's a cut of the film or it's in the making of the film, that your boyfriend at the time should feature more. and this was kind of feedback that you had on in the making, presumably from sort of somebody within the industry. And I just wondered if you could speak to any of the kind of challenges and the ableism that you faced in telling your story the way that you wanted to tell it.
Sure, thank you. That's one of my favorite parts of the film as well. Yeah, I got that all the time, not from anyone in the filmmaking team, but like when I was pitching and stuff, I got it all the time. People were just baffled as to why I wasn't interviewing my then partner. Because I think they wanted, well, like I say it in the film, I'm entirely sure that they wanted a non-disabled hero. They wanted to, it's like this morbid curiosity almost. They want to know, like, what's it like being with someone like that, like how, what attracted you to her. Yeah, it's really, really objectifying, and it's just such a bone of contention within the disability community as well, is this like fascination in partners of people, disabled people, and parents as well, and any kind of caregiving figure. So yeah, I felt it just, it annoyed me so much. It just felt, it felt so irrelevant, his perspective. It was my story, and it was the disabled community's story, different people in my community's story, and it just was bizarre and so annoying. So I bitch about it in the film.
Yeah, and I mean, it just really, really lands a point, doesn't it? Because as you say, it's so much entirely your story, both as the subject and as the filmmaker. And I just think it's, and it's incredible. It's an incredible story, and it's an incredible storytelling. And I think, I guess it just really kind of landed the point of almost everything that you're exploring in the film. Right there in that point in terms of perspective, and the perspective that people wanted to hear from.
Boring.
Yeah, exactly. But I really commend you on including it, because I think it's I think it was just really kind of hit home the perspective that we are constantly kind of fed, as you say, like this kind of curiosity. But it's such a wonderful film. And I wonder if you just want to speak, I mean, without giving away like the ending, because you're kind of on a search for something, but I wonder if there's anything that you want to say about where you're feeling now, in terms of this question of, is there anybody out there?
I feel I found my answer. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler really to say that I kind of had what I was looking for all along, in my disabled friends and the disabled community, more widely. But it was a really genuine journey. What you see in the film is, I really do go on that emotional journey, and I'm really excited that people love the film, that it's speaking to people, and that it's opening eyes. I really didn't know. I thought that disabled people were going to find it like a bit basic, because really the message of the film is very simple, especially if you already like identify as politically disabled, I guess. And I also thought that non-disabled people might get it, but actually it's doing exactly what I wanted it to, I think. So yay.
Yeah, and that sense of community also comes through really strongly. Some of the, some of those best scenes are, yourself and your friend Naomi. Conversations that the two of you have, and I guess for people to see, I can understand for people to see themselves, represented is really meaningful. But also I think that sense of community coming through, as you say, it's your story, but it's also your friends, was really beautiful to see. Thank you.
I love the scenes with me and Naomi. I think they're really humanizing. It's just two friends smoking and getting pissed, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We're going to open it up a little bit more broadly now, so feel free to jump in. But watching and rewatching all these films, parenthood, coming of age, and just personal agency, sort of through coming of age in some instances, but definitely personal agency, come through so strongly in all of your films. And I'm curious if they're kind of themes and boundaries you want to explore more in any of your future projects as filmmakers or as artists and as artists.
I think I'm just kind of drawn to all the stories that I never saw growing up that I wish I saw, you know, that kind of tap into everything, all my emotional states. Like I don't think I've seen Black motherhood shown in this way that I showed in Earth Mama, and I don't know, maybe next time I'll look into interracial couples in a different way. I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I'm just exploring stuff at the moment, but it's really just about kind of like thinking about myself in the films that I wish I saw that kind of speak to audiences like me, I guess.
You, Molly, could you talk a little bit about that topic?
Yeah, I guess similarly, they're just like trying to raise conversations that we didn't have when we were growing up on screen. I'm kind of fascinated in teenage life because I feel like it's the chaos before, well, actually all of it's chaos, isn't it? But like trying to figure out, you know, like where your place is in the world and who your friends are and stuff like that. But I feel like I keep coming of age, so maybe I'll just keep coming of age and figuring out who I am, and that'll probably reflect on screen, I imagine.
The eternal coming of age as an artist. That's great. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah. I was thinking about people who are supporting people in addiction or who have lost people in addiction. I just remember being silent for the whole of my school life, and people who I went to school with have got in touch with me saying, I never knew any of that happened. I never knew that you had a mum who had a heroin addiction, or people didn't really know that was supporting my then partner through addiction as well. And you just have this fear of getting someone into trouble, and so you just become like this caring role that you're keeping a secret as well as trying to do everything else. And it's also people who are supporting people in prison who have got addiction issues. The forums are just all secret forums on social media because you're just hiding all of the time. So it made us discuss as a team, how is it that we can, you know, this is our story too, but how do we kind of navigate that? And yeah, there's just so many people who are hiding who are really exhausted, and that the focus isn't usually on the families supporting these people or who have lost these people. It just seems to be a big hush hush all of the time. So I don't really know what we're going to do, but I know that we're going to carry on talking together and see what arises from that. But we're also concerned about what's happening, the impact beyond the film. So having exhibitions and all different kind of mediums, sculpture, painting, poetry, from people who are in these situations, so they can meet each other and so they can also express themselves through creativity.
Yeah, to add to that, I think that stories that like have sort of moral complexity that go so much beyond like good or bad, and I really like got that in Savanah, your film, and Molly, your film. And like I just want to say, actually, while we're all together, like our category, there's four of us here from one of our, I know Molly, you're in a few, I think, but like in our debut category, I love all of your films, and they're so powerful and amazing, and it's just so amazing to be alongside you guys because you're making beautiful work and amazing work. But yeah, that sort of moral complexity that I do think is in a lot of our work at the moment. And there's a quote, a Rumi quote that says, beyond doing right and doing wrong, there's a field, I'll meet you there. And I really like that as a kind of guiding light to work? Like, what is that space that's beyond like good and bad narratives that we've all grown up with, and like what is that like, where is that nuance, and how do we tell better stories within that space? And also that we continue thinking about how we tell these stories. I mean, I'm not saying that our model with Blue Bag Life is the perfect model, and it was very specific for this project, but you know, the way that we tell stories and how we rethink the structures that in the way that we're telling the stories, I think that really going to have an impact as well on the kind of world that we are wanting to not only reflect but build in the stories we tell. So like this collective model that worked for Blue Bag Life is like one way of sort of rethinking like more typical patriarchal structures of like top-down approach, and it was a really, really beautiful way of working. And I hope that maybe that's something as well that like we all can explore and think about more.
Can I just mention one more thing that we were doing? I think it's something to do with interclass collaborations as well. That became really important to think about how we can help each other from different backgrounds.
Yeah, thank you. I really want to pick up on something that you said, Rebecca, which is, you know, to point out that a number of these films are debuts, and we've seen, you know, an incredible boom in debut films, you know, especially by women and non-binary filmmakers in the last couple of years, and that's really, really been reflected in the BAFTA nominations this year and last. And I wonder, you know, speaking particularly to those of you in that category, what you learned through the process of making, but also releasing your films, where you've been doing it for the first time. And by releasing, I mean, like, you know, what you've learned from the kinds of conversations that you've had around your film, in terms of like what you might, you know, say for those emerging filmmakers watching.
Yeah, I think trust your gut.
Mm-hmm.
and write stories that you feel very passionate about. I remember like when we were at film school, they were like, you know, just try and like keep it as simple as possible, like write 2 people in a room and like make these stories like as easy to make as possible. But I kind of think that it's rubbish, and that you should just like try and make something that you feel strongly about, because I think all of these films are subjects that people feel very passionate, live or die about, you know, and I think that shows on screen.
Yeah, thank you. And Savanah or Ella, like, I guess anything that maybe you wish you know now, you wish you'd known at the beginning of this process?
I guess like something I wish I knew at the beginning of the process. I don't know. I think it's like better not knowing. I think there was like something really great about just like I have no idea what I'm doing, and like I gotta be fearless in this, and like I'm just gonna figure it out as I keep going. And like there's a really big beauty in that, and I see that, you know, not only in these films here, but also every time I see a filmmaker I love, I look at their first film and I'm like, this is so exciting. There's something so like daring about someone's first film. And I hope, if anything, to take that sort of like fearlessness into what I do next, you know? And because all of us were probably dealing with so many obstacles along the way, not just like, I mean, there's just a billion things that probably each of us were dealing with. And it's terrifying to do that in your first film. And like, you know, all of a sudden for your next one, you've got like people that have seen you do it before. And so maybe, I don't know, just the fearlessness. I want to take that. I want to learn from debut times a bit more, you know. And
what for, you know, again, and I'll come to you, Madeleine and Brenda, but again, for those who've just made their first film, what is the change that you feel like you need to see from the industry to support you to make your next project? You know, there is a big you know, the kind of gap between the first feature film and second feature film in terms of the number of years is, you know, statistically that gap is far wider for women filmmakers as opposed to men, and obviously, you know, that's something about, you know, and that's regardless of the success of the film, and we're talking about incredibly successful debuts here because that's why you're here, but yeah, I mean, that gap is down to industry rather than the talent. And so I wonder what change do you think we need to see in terms of how you feel like you'd like to be supported to make that leap to a second feature?
Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised with changes I feel I have felt since I was starting out making my documentary, which was, yeah, over 5 years ago now. Yeah, it was 2018. And I remember, yeah, like we spoke about earlier, the question of let's get more of your partner in, let's interview your partner. It's so relevant to this disabled story, even though he's non-disabled. I'm seeing so much less of that now. I'm working on my next film. I'm writing it at the moment. It's fiction this time. It's a historical drama about the life of a court dwarf in the 17th century and his journey to overcoming his internalized ableism and finding community with the court fools of the palace. So anyway, crazy story, very similar themes. And yeah, I'm writing it for the BFI, and I think there's an appetite for stories. Yeah, well, stories about, I guess, minorities. I feel really positive, like that there's a bit of a moment at the moment, particularly for disabled stories perhaps, and I'm gonna milk it for all it's worth, take advantage of all the positive discrimination out there. So yeah, I feel good.
That's brilliant to hear, and I'm not surprised that there's that appetite. I mean, in part because people who've been minoritized over time are starved of, you know, seeing their stories on screen. So yeah, I'm really happy to hear that that's kind of been recognized and that, yeah, you're being supported on your way to making a second already. And Brenda, what about your story? Because you've moved from TV to film, like, so this was, I think, was this your first writing credit on a feature film, but of course, you know, a kind of established career in writing for television. Where do you think you might go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I love hearing everybody's story. It's so inspiring. And like, it's funny because I feel like I'm the outlier in the sense that I've come from very commercial, like big budget kind of world, which is so different from this more independent. And it sounds amazing. Actually, that's where I want to go. Like, I basically am like, I have been working at these big studios and Pixar, and it's been amazing, but it is also like, ultimately, I kind of want to tell my own story, and like, and you're just, it's such a machine, and you're just not in charge, and that's a whole other set of challenges. And so I'm just, you know, after this Pixar experience, which was great, I really did say to myself, like, I want to write and direct my own movie and like tell my own story and do it like my own personal story that I feel like, you know, and so it's so inspiring to hear you guys talk about your experiences. And so yeah, I want to do a low budget like independent film that it's kind of like a Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It's like it's a character driven but it's also sci-fi. So my perfect world is like sort of these like very grounded character driven things, but have a high concept, and the concept just services the character arc actually. And so and it is something that I think is doable because it's like a near future kind of situation. So I feel like, yeah, I'm very excited to try to do that next and tackle that. So.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great to hear. And Madeleine, I wonder if you can say if there's anything that you could speak to your journey from, I think this is your third feature.
Yeah, you know, historically, I mean, I've mostly been an editor in both narrative and documentary, and then I have directed and edited really two documentaries, and I'm working on another one now. But I think, you know, it is so inspiring, like Brenda said, to hear everybody. And one thing that Rebecca said really resonates with me, which is, you know, I don't know, sometimes there's this idea that, you know, protagonists have to be moral, and there's this kind of like black and white world. And I love this idea of beyond morality, beyond, you know, all of that. And just, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but I do in my work so often think of, I guess, the cliche that, you know, the more specific, the more universal. And I believe that to its core. And I think in my work, you know, in everything that I've done, and including this thing this documentary I've been shooting on and off for a while now, it's what's interests me is kind of cracking open the reality of another person, you know, and really trying to feel it, really trying to not just explain it, not just sort of in a numbing way, expositionally show it, but actually try to feel it. Because, I mean, for so many reasons, because that is the complexity of experience, because, you know, obviously that brings compassion, right? Ultimately, something that this world needs so badly right now. And so I'm really intrigued by, you know, going into things that, or exploring experiences or a human being who maybe we haven't acknowledged, or we haven't really felt what they feel, and trying to find a way to allow us to experience what they feel, and in a surprising, visceral way. I know that was so vague what I just said, but that is, I think, what really excites me and has excited me in everything that I've done, and what I'm trying to do in this new film that I've been shooting as well.
Thank you. And that's, yeah, exciting to hear that you're shooting already.
What are the panel's thoughts on filmmakers from marginalized communities tending to break through with stories that are so personal and/or emotionally raw? Do they think it's a necessary part of filmmakers breaking out overall, or do they think it's something particular to those from systemically underrepresented backgrounds and identities? So I guess, yeah, if you are, you know, of a marginalized background, do you feel like the only way to get noticed is to kind of bare your soul in the first instance in some ways? If anyone has any thoughts on that.
I talk about all this all the time with actually even Molly here. It's like the amount of yourself you give to your film, and like what that feels like. And sometimes that doesn't feel great, or sometimes it feels amazing, because you also receive, it's not just about like your success as a filmmaker, but like people watching the film might make you feel less alone. And like the reception in that way can be very supportive and therapeutic for you. And I personally, I don't know if you have to tell your personal story. For me, it's just like, it's the only thing I can do when I sit down and have a page in front of me, is like go within. It's like I've had various moments where I wanted to make something like bigger and like further away from me, and for some reason I always bring it back to myself because it feels the most honest. And yeah, so I have all these aspirations at various points to kind of pull it away, and it always comes back to myself. And so I don't know if that, I don't think you have to do that, but I also think people really resonate with honesty and authenticity, and like people's stories that they haven't seen before on screen. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting question, because I feel like as a POC or minority, it's like, I feel like I have stories to tell that are very personal and very much about my cultural identity and specificity and stuff. But I also want to tell stories that aren't just that, you know, and I've felt like, and I've done both. And it's funny, like nowadays, because I guess it's weirdly in vogue, like I have a story like the movie I'm telling now is about it's very specific, but it's not about racial identity. It's not about that. It's about some love and something more universal and character stuff. And I've been kind of pressured to be like, can you make it about being Asian? And I'm like, this piece is not about being Asian or being an immigrant. Yes, Elemental was all about that. Other things I've done have been all about that. And but I think, Madeleine, you're right. Like, I think I love watching things that are like a world, a person that I want to step into someone's world, see what that's like. And I think because we know our world so well, we can do that so well as creators, as you know what I mean? But I think I want to be able to not just do that. I want to be able to tell someone else's story with empathy and be just as convincing and grounded in telling that person's story, even though it's not my specific, personal, whether it's racial, whatever, wherever, socioeconomic story. So that is my goal as a artist, is to be able to do both kinds, you know what I mean? And I think a lot of times your first piece is going to be your personal story, and maybe it should be, because it makes sense, because you know that so well. That is something that's going to ring so true and resonate and all that stuff. But yeah, I think, at least for me, I want to have, I like the ability to do both and not have to feel like I have to just do the one because of the way I look and the way where I come from.
I just do think it's a really complex thing of putting your own trauma on screen, because then you have to be kind of prepared for what comes your way in that sense as well, in that like script notes, edit notes, that would never happen. Press, like, we've had like live on TV, people sit down and be like, so you were raped, and you're like, fuck, man. Like, so yeah, I think you just have to be prepared for what you're doing when you put it out in the world. Not saying you shouldn't do it, but it's a long journey.
Yeah, I was going to say those questions, like I got, so have you managed to have a baby yet then, and things like that, and it's just like, I don't know if I'm ready for this part yet. And I think I want to go back to that therapy in the budget line again, how important that is, especially if it's like a debut film. It's not always therapeutic. There are parts of it that could be quite traumatic, and I say this to students as well. Maybe you're not ready to open up yet if you've never done this before, and you can't just spill your guts out and have no support, because it could do much more damage than good. So I think that's really important to consider, therapy, because the team can't take all of that on, and it could be really detrimental.
Yeah, we also had it on our in our budget as well, and it was like radical for all of us. And yeah, agreed.
Yeah, that's great to hear that, that you also had that provision from professionals. And Brenda, I feel like something about what you're saying is, like, you should, yes, be able to tell your story. You should also have, be able to tell whatever story you want to be able to tell. And there's something about control there, that should be within that should be within your control. But I also feel like, Molly, something that you're saying, and Lisa, is that, in terms of being prepared for the questions that come back in the real world, like, I just like to think that, in terms of those questions that you're getting, from press, and in the kind of, spaces where you're expected to speak to your films, I just hope there comes a time where there's just an expectation of more compassion and, in the questioning that you're getting, and just kind of holding those spaces with, with yourselves as the makers, as well as with the audiences, with more care.
Yeah, I've actually written down every question that I've got that I felt uncomfortable about, and hopefully we're going to publish it as its own ridiculous article.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Good for you. Yeah. I think as well, just chiming in, not a filmmaker, but I think engage with artists as artists, not people who have had something happen to them or have gone through something. And I think that isn't always afforded to female filmmakers, marginalized filmmakers. I want to thank you all so much for participating in this conversation. And I wish you all good luck and congratulations, and we look forward to seeing more from you. Thank you.
I want to thank the partner distributors that made this event happen. So Conic, Disney, Dogworth Movie, Tiger Lily Productions and Universal Pictures. And finally, yeah, thank you to all of you. Thank you, Madeleine, Rebecca, Lisa, Savanah, Molly, Brenda and Ella. Thank you and good luck.